Welcome home. We are WNST, Tassel, Baltimore. We're AM 1570. We are rocking our world here during an election time. We got a quick turnaround for football this week, and we're getting the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road. Beginning next week, we'll be at State Fair, going to be at Cooper's North, bunch of places through the Turkey holiday, all of it brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. I will have Raven scratch-offs to give away. As we did at Mama's on the Half Shell last week, we had Finn and my pal Howard out. And also our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care putting us out on the road for the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. The Oyster Tour in progress, brought to you by Curio Wellness and Far & Daughter and our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. The oysters keeping the bay nice and clean. So we can have these big fat crab cakes here in November to go along with a big fat victory over the Denver Broncos 41-10. And now a quick turnaround. Got an election. Everybody go vote, vote, vote. Please vote. If you're in Pennsylvania like Luke, vote responsibly. Vote like the president's going to be babysitting your nieces or something like that. Luke, it's a weird way. It's also trading deadline for the NFL, right? We're at the halfway point where you can't be 8-8. You can only be 9-8 or 8-9. And the Ravens feel like the defensive side's getting together here. But the trading deadline and Eric DeCosta and wherever Zadarius Smith winds up, that won't be Baltimore maybe or not, or who our competitors might get to fortify their run. This is an important couple of days after adding Deontay Johnson last week for basically, nothing, quite frankly, right?
Yeah, I mean, a pick swap that I think probably will amount to 15 or 20 spots, a fifth round to a sixth round pick. So never, never any doubt about that deal. I mean, we'll see. Deontay Johnson didn't play a whole lot on Sunday, and that wasn't surprising considering he only had 3 days of practice, and Lamar Jackson was only on the field for one of those days. But I think it's all attention on what Eric DeCosta does or does not do to try to fortify this defense. We've talked about the defense, step in the right direction, but certainly not coming out of Sunday's game saying, oh, all is well, right? They shut down Bo Nix and the Broncos offense, which they didn't really, but because we know that they had some opportunities in that game, but certainly played better in the second half as the offense started to put some distance on the scoreboard. But what is going to happen with that pass rush? The safety position, is there a name out there to add? I mean, I think it's notable that Eddie Jackson was a healthy scratch a week after he started in place of Marcus Williams, right? So I'm not making any assumptions there, but is there a safety that move to be made there? I don't know. So I think most of the attention now is on the pass rush. The reports as of Sunday evening, we're talking about Zadarius Smith winding up in Detroit, sounding like that's a matter of when, not if, but until it's official, you never know, right? And this is a weird week in the sense that the Ravens play a Thursday night game too. Well, on top of all of this, right? I mean, you had the trade deadline that makes for a weird week anyway, knowing that you can bring someone in Tuesday or Wednesday and they're on the field playing for you that Sunday. A little bit different when you're playing a Thursday night game though. But it's so odd, and we've talked about this because you look at the Ravens right now. I think they're fifth in sacks. You just look at that, you say, well, the pass rush can't be that bad, right? But then you peel back the layers of the onion and you see pressure rate. I think Next Gen Stats has them at 26th, then Pro Football Reference has them low. Their pass rush win rate, but from that ESPN keeps track of, low. Point is, yeah, in terms of just looking at it strictly from a sack standpoint, it hasn't looked too bad. But we also know that sacks only that makes up a very small percentage of defensive plays. What are you doing when you're not bringing the quarterback down? Are you getting enough heat on the quarterback? And that's where I think anyone who's watched this defense this year has seen that it's been inconsistent at best. I think we've seen it look really good at times, but it tends to be a little more feast or famine than you'd like. Even on Sunday, they bring Bo Nix down 4 different times. Go back and look at those plays. He stood in the pocket for a few seconds on each one of those. It wasn't as though someone got this unbelievable get off and just beat, won a one-on-one matchup to bring down the quarterback. So what can you do there? I mean, I think part of this is we need to be realistic and understand that I don't think the Raiders are going to make Max Crosby available, for example. And even if they were, what are you giving up to get him? What's the asking price? Is it anywhere that makes sense? I mean, I don't think necessarily players like that are even going to be moved. So you kind of look at the next tier. You look at Zadarius Smith. People have talked about Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, he's got an extra year due on his contract. He's on the wrong side of 30. Is there a move to be made there where maybe you could make a reunion, have a reunion be possible? I don't know. Some people have talked about Azeez Ojulari of the Giants. He's someone that probably garners interest. So, there are names out there, but in the same way I just mentioned about the sack total for the Ravens defense, right? And you looked at that, if someone knew nothing about the Ravens and hadn't watched them, they'd say, hey, you're fifth in sacks. What's the big problem? There is also the question of fit for what you do schematically. I mean, we talked about this a lot with Yannick Ngakoue 4 years ago when the Ravens brought him in and, looked good on paper. Maryland guy, had been to a Pro Bowl, and the impact was minimal. So, not that it was a bad trade. I mean, it's not like they gave up a second round pick for him or anything like that. But you also do have to recognize, it's got to be someone that's a fit. It's got to be someone that, look, trade a draft pick. I'm not at all sitting here saying you need to hold on to your picks by any means, but you also don't want to just give away capital for something that's not going to move the needle a whole lot. I mean, the thing
Well, it's
about
also a
Deontay,
unique time for them in that you're always talking they're going to win the Super Bowl. They need to win the Super Bowl. So
yeah,
there ain't no, F those picks to some degree in an organization where it's not F those picks. But it's not even F those picks when they have these supplemental picks coming back based on all of these guys we talk about them losing, including, next week we'll be talking about the linebacker that the Steelers, help provide for better draft picks for us next year. But this is part of the game this organization plays with draft picks that they can make expendable in a year when they're expected to win the Super Bowl. And if there's a piece there, they went and got Roquan Smith. They went and got Eugene Monroe. I mean, they don't mind making a splash maneuver if such a thing is available. And they
well,
have the
and
arsenal to do it from a draft pick
right,
standpoint.
they do. However, I will also throw this out there. There are other teams looking for these things, right? I mean, everyone around the league that fancies himself a contender, save for maybe a couple teams, are probably looking for pass rush help. So, yes, they have draft capital, but there is, there's you look at those picks when they're projected to pick at the end of the round, whether they're going to pick 32nd and win the Super Bowl or whether they'll be like they were this past year, which was they ended up being 30th, right? And because they got to the AFC Championship and they had the best record in football in the regular season. So other teams are looking for that. So you always have to stay true to value from the not from the standpoint of you not being willing to overpay, but if you're going to overpay, you want it to be worth it, right? You don't want to overpay and then it's like, well, we're adding a guy, but we don't think he's that much better than Yannick Ngakoue or that much better than Tavius Robinson. So, I mean that's all part of it. And
Is Jack Flaherty available at the trading deadline?
yeah, uh, right. So I mean it's challenging, but to your point, and I wholeheartedly agree. If the move is there to be made, and maybe it's a touch more than you'd like to give up, then do it. Do it. I mean, they're never going to be at a point where they're saying forget about draft picks, right? I mean, that's this organization's DNA is the draft, and looking at their track record over a quarter century plus, it's hard to argue with that, right? So that's never going to go away, but
Well, that's why
there
they're not giving up 2 1s on Monday morning for Max Crosby. They're it's not what they do.
Yeah, well, but I guess the point I was trying to make though is you also have to keep in mind, even if they're willing to give up, let's use that just as the hypothetical, right? Some other team's going to be willing to give up 2 1s, and guess what? That other team's probably projected to have better looking first round picks than what the Ravens do. So, I the question actually came up in the Ravens media room this past week. And again, if someone's listening to this right now and Zadarius Smith is officially a Detroit Lion, then we're just speaking in hypotheticals here. But the question was posed: would you give up a fourth for Zadarius Smith? And I have no idea what the price is going to be for him, whoever lands him. But I'd say yeah. But then you think about it: if the Ravens are among the best teams in football, then that fourth kind of sort of feels closer to a fifth to the Cleveland Browns. So then it might be, hey, they want a third from you, and they might want more than that because you're an AFC North division foe. So that's just one example. But I'd hate to think, and I said this in our previous segment, breaking down this Ravens win over the Broncos. I'd hate to think that the defense holds them back after so many years, going all the way back to the days of Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. So many years of the offense holding them back and having championship caliber defenses. Some years, frankly, wasted because their offense stunk and just wasn't good enough. I'd hate them to be on the opposite side of this, where you have an MVP quarterback, a guy who looks like he's going to on his way to winning his third MVP halfway through the season at the very least, and you have guy who's going to be the rushing champion, assuming he stays healthy. Although Saquon Barkley is also having a heck of a year, so let's throw that out there.
By the
But
way, for a weekend of plays, we had that kid catch the ball on Thursday night that I've never seen anything like it. And then we had this pirouette thing that Barkley did
Barkley,
that I've
yeah,
still never seen. Like, so why we watch the NFL? Not just to bet on it because we're all degenerates here and that's what we do. Not, but or to heap praise on any particular part of this. But every weekend we see stuff we've never seen before, including Lamar. Just including things like Lamar.
absolutely, absolutely. But you look at everything they have offensively. I mean, right now, their biggest weakness on offense is what? Their offensive line. But even that has been better than many expected and has improved and has certainly looked like it's good enough. And even pointing out the Browns game, or even pointing out what happened in Kansas City. You're still talking about a team that's managed, even on bad days, to score 20 plus points, right? So get your defense to a level where you're not as worried about Joe Burrow scoring 38 on you, or take your pick of whatever quarterback you want to throw out there. Patrick Mahomes, assuming the Chiefs do what the Chiefs do, which is get better as the year goes on. But you just want to be in a position where can you fortify your defense? Can you, whether it's coverage on the back end, maybe it is bringing in a safety. Again, I don't know who that is that's definitively going to be available that you say, hey, that's a clear upgrade over what we have, or talking about the pass rush. But man, if they're waking up Wednesday morning without making a move, it doesn't mean season's over or anything like crazy. Let's be clear. You can only make the moves that are available to you to make, but there's going to be a sense of disappointment and there's going to be a sense of uneasiness. I think that you've got this amazing offense. Don't let this defense be what holds you back in January. After all these years of it being the opposite, going
That's
way,
all the
way,
more
way
reason
back.
I think that they would not be willing. They might be willing to give up a low 3 for something that somebody else would give up a 4 because
Yeah,
not because they're desperate, just because they need it. Like they need in the same way they went and got Dean Pease a couple weeks ago. Like
yeah,
they're trying to do whatever they can do, whether it was benching Marcus Williams last week and telling him shut up with you guys about it and go out and play. And Eddie Jackson got his this week. And hey, man, stakes are high, and we just won 41-10. We got to play again on Thursday night. I just think from a defensive standpoint, you're asking this pass rush to do something that it hasn't really done since McDonald, since Clowney, since last year, since the back end was better, since Matabike was better. Like there was just a lot of better. And to your point, Travis Jones not being healthy, um, just a lot of it. And even Kyle Hamilton just being such a special player that they're trying to scheme up things and do different things when there's not a lot of communication going on as a unit. But pass rush has to be better, and I don't think that's coming from within. I don't think that's coming from David Ajabu. I don't believe that anymore. And I don't think Tyus Bowser's coming back or any of the other internal remedies that they've talked about since like Matt Judon left.
yeah. And again, I mean, look, Tavius Robinson had a nice day on Sunday. Uh, Yannick Ngakwe's had his moments. I'd much rather that those be my 4 and 5 in my edge rusher rotation. They need to add a top 3 guy to go along with Van Noy and Odafe Owe. I mean, that's at this point. I mean, the Ravens are telling you what they think of David Ajabo at this point, and I know anytime you ask them, they'll say, "Oh, he's doing a great job. He just needs to keep learning all that." And look, he still might figure it out at some point down the line, right? We've seen guys come into their own in year 3 and year 4. Paul Kruger got paid by the Cleveland Browns for doing such a thing, but where it stands right now, when he's a healthy scratch, it's clear they don't have a lot of confidence in him. So can you add another guy that can be a factor? Is that guy out there again? Whether it's making a move for Zadarius Smith and the Browns agree to it, or bringing back Jadeveon Clowney, or getting Ojulari, or any number of other guys that you look at and say, okay, well, maybe even the sack totals aren't as high as you'd like from a perception standpoint, but you dig into it and say, hey, he's got a really good pressure rate. We feel like we can scheme this guy up in a certain role, and he's going to do a nice job for us, and he's going to pop. And doesn't mean he's going to have 12 sacks for us, but he might have six, and that could be a difference. And he could have a really good pressure rate and be disruptive, and kind of be serve in a role in a capacity that really worked well for this guy under Mike McDonald. And we feel we can execute the same way now, trying to do this. So, it's all about, so much of it's about fit, right? It's been talked about a lot, and I've seen people mention this on social. I've seen some people maybe not write big exposés about this or anything like this, but Patrick Queen, if you look at like his Pro Football Focus grade for Pittsburgh, it's not like he's playing at an elite level there. I mean, I haven't necessarily heard a lot of people say, "Oh, Patrick Queen's going to make the Pro Bowl as a member of the Steelers,"
Well, it
but
felt like with him and Roquan was more like
it
peppers
fit
and onions here in
it
some
right.
way.
It fit really well, right? It fit very well. Geno Stone hasn't played great football for the Bengals, but it fit really well. Him being their third safety and what they did last year, and how they could utilize Hamilton and how they utilize Marcus Williams. So there's
I even think when they had Chuck Clark, we're going back a couple here, but him
sure,
wearing the dot and guys that saw the field well, guys that were leaders. That was the thing that Earl Thomas never got. That I don't know Marcus Williams could be a leader. He didn't play well enough. He wasn't on the field enough to exhibit that thing that Eric Weddle had when he got here, which is just knowing where everybody's supposed to be, just lining up right. Even when Chuck Clark was a middling talent to some degree,
hmm
he could line others up in the same way that the linebacker that came after Ray Lewis did, right?
yeah, Daryl Smith. I mean,
I was
at a
going to
time,
call him Al Smith. That was an Oiler. Daryl Smith. I always get that wrong.
yeah,
Gosh.
yeah. Although all of his teammates called him Buck, that was his
The
nickname.
old
But
Jaguar,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, exactly.
But
So
those were the smart guys. You know what I
sure,
mean? Like, um, uh, for me, Jameel McClain was one of those guys that got on the field that just knew where everybody was supposed to stand. And when you don't have that, you don't have much, right? I mean, they
yeah.
really have had communication, have great ball players. If you're misaligned, misassigned, or miscommunicate, if Rod Woodson's back there with Ray Lewis and they're miscommunicating, you're going to get beat by a tight end.
Well, and again, that's what makes this so frustrating because look, we mentioned a couple guys that aren't there anymore from a player personnel standpoint, but it's not like this defense turned over entirely, right? I mean, they didn't replace eight starters or something like that. This isn't like a college football team that had eight guys graduate to the NFL. I mean, we're still talking about mainly role players there. I mean, okay, Patrick Queen starter, understood. Jadeveon Clowney starter, understood. But like Geno Stone and Ronald Darby, I mean, they were role players, right? They
Well,
were
when
they were
Roquan looks slower, right?
right.
When Humphrey's beaten up, when the backside's not communicating in a general sense, when you have no pass rush, when Matabike's not as good as he was, but the whole run front has been outstanding, it puts more pressure on the back end, even then, knowing that, all right, they're not going to run, so now they're going to pass, or we've got a lead, or it's a track meet, and they know they're playing Lamar, so they're just going to pass more, and we're going to have to cover more and because we're not going to sack more or flush out more, especially not against Joe Burrow on Thursday night. So it just becomes more taxing all the way
Yeah.
around, right?
It does. It does. But on the flip side, you would say, but it should be easier if you're in these positions where they're going to pass, right? I mean,
Well, this goes
that
back to what makes Mike McDonald different and better than Zach Orr.
I mean, just and look again. It doesn't mean Zach Orr's not going to figure this out, but yeah, there's too much going on. There are too many breakdowns. There are too many guys that we perceived as high level players not playing high level right now to just say, oh, it's all on the players. And to be clear, that doesn't absolve the players entirely either. Let's be very clear. Again, it's never just one thing. But is there a piece, whether it's a safety, whether it's an edge guy, whether and let's also throw this out there. Interior defensive line. Michael, we haven't talked about it. Michael Pierce is on IR now with a calf injury. He's supposed to be back, but that's another important piece to your rotation that you think of as more of a run stopper. And yes, Michael Pierce is more of a run stopper than a pass rush guy, but he's still part of that equation that you now have less depth up there. And again, I mean, hopefully Travis Jones, with him barely playing at all, not really playing at all on Sunday, didn't play at all on defense Sunday. We'll see if he's available Thursday night. But even if he plays or plays on a limited basis, he'll have the mini bye on the other side of that, hoping that you get him right because he's a big part of what was actually going well with this defense. And not having him right the last few weeks has certainly taken its toll on the pass rush. But so much of the trade deadline, there's the splash moves, and then there are the moves that are kind of under the radar. And if you can find someone that you just think is a really good fit, that's why, I've seen some people make mention, hey, Calais Campbell might be available, with the Dolphins. I mean, they lost again on Sunday. I mean, could you bring him back as he's not going to solve your edge rush issue, but anyone who goes back and looks at the Ravens pass rush when Calais Campbell was there, wasn't him necessarily, but it was him with some of those defensive line games where they could stunt and twist and
Dude,
things
he
like
wants
that.
to win a championship
And
too.
he could help set some people up on some of those pass rushes and stunts and whatnot. So, and I don't think you're going to give up very much for someone like that at this point in his career. So, look,
Can I
if you
throw
want,
something at you just
yeah,
as a
go ahead.
talking point to jump in on something here? Kyle Hamilton. Um, and how he's being used as a super freak, right? Different kind of super freak than Javon Curse kind of super freak, or different kind of super freak than JJ Watt kind of super freak, or even TJ Watt kind of super freak, right? Um, he blitzes. He's up on the line of scrimmage. He's on the ball. He's up on the line. He's super special and rangy and has a skill set to beat a tight end, maul a running back, hold his own against a guard, or at least be fast enough to beat a tackle. Whatever you think of him and how he's being used is part of this that Swiss Army knife thing that leaves them a little bit more exposed in the fact that you don't want your safety to be a rush edge. You want Terrell Suggs to be that guy. Or in perfect, you want Ojabo to be that guy, or you want someone else to be that guy. But I do think that it can be a little dangerous that when you have that kind of player to say, how are we best going to utilize him? Let's get him to the ball, to the ball, to the ball. And at what risk and at what sacrifice? And by the way, I go back to all the contributions of Chad Steele to this program and my programming is that I get to watch the games on TV now in real time. I used to watch them in tape delay, but didn't pay so close attention to what the announcers may or may not be getting from the Broncos or a relationship with Sean Payton that Tony Romo might have because Tony Romo's whole career was because of Sean Payton, right? And he pointed that out a couple of times and said, I love Sean Payton, right? But he pointed out like that Bo Nix was being coached to wherever Kyle Hamilton was. Don't throw that way. Go the other way. And Romo said that a couple of times. Like he threw at Hamilton at one point. Hamilton got his hand on the ball, and Romo's like, "Oh, Sean's not going to be happy with that." So the things that you learn when you listen the right way, and you see like offensive coordinators and veteran Hall of almost fame kind of guys like Sean Payton are telling Tony Romo before the broadcast, dude, I'm telling this kid, if you see Hamilton coming on the right, move the play to the left. And I don't know what that means, but I know it happened during the broadcast. And I know that Hamilton, the apple of your eye, the apple of everybody's eye, he's going to the Hall of Really Good. He's a special player. How to best utilize him when you have deficiencies in lots of other places on the field that, to your point, if you don't get to the quarterback, and you could never get to Brady, you could never get to Manning, the really good ones, just get rid of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the question you posed before, as far as is using him in such a way, does that put them in some bad spots sometimes? I mean, to me, that's not a Hamilton problem. That's a problem of you've got to have another safety that And that's why Geno Stone was so valuable, right? He just played solid football. And look, he led the AFC in interceptions last year. I think if you went back and looked at that, most of those were right place, right time. Now, he played the ball well and he caught the ball, which we've talked about that being an issue for this secondary. But look, what you just mentioned as far as the example for Kyle Hamilton, it's no different than Bill Belichick telling Tom Brady, find Ed Reed on every single play pre-snap. I mean, famously, Brady wrote that on his wristband when he played the Ravens. Find 20 on every play. I mean, you can go back and someone zoomed in on it and you can find it on social media
And
to
when you
this
can
day.
process football at
Right.
that level, you
Yeah.
can process everything. And it's like looking right, left, and right again, and left again when you're crossing the street when you're a little kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That last check on a player creates either chaos or opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Like literally, right?
Right, exactly. And look, I mean, this isn't something unique. I mean, this is Lawrence Taylor. Which side of the line of scrimmage is he lining up on? Well, you better go to the other side, or you better get the ball out quick, or you better have someone chipping and helping
Who's
out the
your
left
hot? Who's
tackle.
your hot, as Marvin would
Exactly,
always
exactly.
say.
So you always have that. So and here I am because in our previous segment I even posed the question: do the Ravens need to go a little more conservative on defense? I'd hate to take Kyle Hamilton out of that Swiss Army knife role in the name of because you don't have another safety that you can trust on the back end to play too high coverage, right? I mean, shame on you if you can't find someone that can do that. And look, Ardarius Washington might be that guy next to Marcus Williams, and maybe that's going to be the answer that isn't perfect, but is better than Marcus Williams and Eddie Jackson on the back end, right? That's what they did Sunday. Eddie Jackson was a healthy scratch, and at least in the second half of the game, coverage was better. So that was a step in the right direction, albeit a modest one. But ultimately, and we talk about this in any sport, right? When you have a unit, when you have a team that's not playing up to a certain standard that you come to expect, the answer is rarely, I need my great player who's playing great to play even greater, right? Yeah, I think that's the easy thing to kind of say and just say, well, can he do more? You need your other guys to step it up. And again, maybe that's why when you and I reconvene to talk about what happens at the trade deadline, maybe they do add a safety. Maybe they do add a defensive back that is another one of those hybrid kind of players that maybe does a few things like Kyle Hamilton, but also can cover on the back end like Kyle Hamilton. And maybe that makes you a little bit better in that way. So, it's hard to say, but they need one of two things, right? Ideally both to happen, but you need to either disrupt the passer a little bit more to help out your coverage on the back end, or your coverage on the back end has to be sticky a little bit longer to the point where your pass rush can get home. Ideally, you'd have both those things improve over the second half of the season. But again, it's not just as simple as fantasy football and say, okay, well, that guy has 6 sacks, so let's go get him. We'll overpay for him, whatever. It's got to be something that fits and makes sense because we talked about this again 4 years ago with Ngakoue. On paper, it looked great, but what they found out at that point in time, and I'm not commenting on him as a player now, but what he was 4 years ago was a guy that didn't necessarily stay true to the defense as far as what they wanted him to do rush wise, did not play the run well, so that left them vulnerable on the edge, and they got to a point where they stopped playing him as much down the stretch as a result. So that doesn't mean that you don't make a move, but you always have to be mindful of guys that are going to be a good scheme fit. And we've seen this with the Ravens defense and their offense, right? There are great players and there are great fits. You want, the best situation is a great player that's a great fit, but they want to try to find something that can help move the needle for them. And again, I kind of point to the pass rush, but it's easier said than done. Go search every team that's not out of it at this point, which aren't that many at this point. Any of those teams, you'll see reporters talking about add a pass rusher, add an edge rusher, boost that pass rush a little bit. They need to get to the quarterback a little more consistently. It's a really popular wish for teams at this trade
And the Ravens
deadline.
are fifth in the league at doing it, right?
Right. Well,
Sort of.
they are in terms of sacks, but again, they're the first team that will tell you we look at pressure rate because Adafe Owe, the last couple of years, didn't have many sacks, but they said, hey, we love his pressure rate. So I'm not going to let them off the hook and just say, hey, we're fifth in sacks. Everything's fine. They know they're not fine with their pass rush. They know that they could really use another guy. Question is the right guy out there that's really going to move the needle for them? And at what cost is it going to be? Because as we said, it's one thing to say you'll give up a fourth round pick, but if there's a team that has a worse record than you that's willing to give up a fourth, then you're talking about having to give up a third. So doesn't mean I wouldn't do it, but you've got to be willing to pay. And we'll see ultimately if the Ravens are willing to do that. We've seen them do it in the past. I mean, go look at what they gave up for Roquan Smith 2 years ago. I don't think there's any reason to look at this and say Eric DeCosta isn't going to go make a move and potentially give up a real draft pick to do it. But it still has to, the deal has to come together. It still has to manifest itself. You can't force it. As much as Ravens fans dream about Max Crosby, if the Raiders say we're not trading him, stop, we're not trading him, period. There's only so much you can do under that scenario. So
But knowing that they dealt for Roquan Smith, knowing that they would play hokey pokey with the cap with the quarterback, they could add an elite player if such an elite
yeah,
player moves along. Like that,
yeah.
that's all I would say.
And
And I wouldn't rule them out
no,
like maybe 20 years ago when nobody made those kind of deals. Things happen here. Teams fall out of favor with a player, or we're not going to sign that player. We don't want that. Whatever it is, just a lot of players and a lot of bad teams that might look to say, I'd rather have a pick.
yeah. And a lot of bad teams saying, not only do we want that pick, but we'll redo his deal and we'll pay down some of what's his remaining salary is to get this done. And that's where it makes it easier for the Ravens, knowing that, they're pretty tight against the cap. There are some things they can do to create room. There are always things you can do to create room. That always comes at a cost. But we saw this with the Deontay Johnson trade. I mean, not only did the Ravens only have a measly late round pick swap to get it done, but Carolina paid down most of what he's owed the rest of the year. I mean, the Ravens are paying him next to nothing. So Deontay Johnson, how much he ends up doing for the Ravens, who knows? But you didn't give up anything of meaningful value to get him, so why not? So that's where we look at this and say, okay, might not be as easy to get an edge rusher using that same formula, but if you're willing to give up an attractive enough pick, a team might say, you know what? We'll take that pick and we'll roll some of what's remaining of his salary into a bonus. We'll pay him that, pay it down, and then you only have to pay the minimum the rest of the year for that player. So there are always ways to do this, but you've got to find an attractive partner. And like I said, what the Ravens are coveting here is not something that's unique. Lots of teams want this, so that's where it is a little more challenging. And, the Browns with Zadarius Smith being a great example. Cleveland might not want to trade in the division, and they say, well, we'll trade them to the NFC, and Detroit's willing to give us a nice pick, and we don't want to deal with Baltimore. We don't like the Ravens. We don't want to make them better. So there are teams that still think like that, even though I think that's a very short-sighted way of viewing things. But we'll see what happens here. Our curiosity will be satisfied very shortly, as Buck Showalter used to always like to say.
We've had great conversations here in the aftermath of a blowout win over the Denver Broncos. Cincinnati Bengals coming in on Thursday night. Luke will be in and out of Owings Mills. You'll hear it all, and Luke's locker room's available out at Baltimore Positive as well. We are doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. I have Raven scratch-offs to give away still in my bag. We're going to be at Cooper's North. We're going to be at State Fair very soon, maybe over at the Beaumont, as well as Coco's in December. All of our regular sponsors. I wear my Coco shirt. December 4th, we're going to be there. December 5th, we're going to be at Gertrude's. December 12th, we're going to be at Fadley's for the holidays. Talking about holiday shipping and crab cakes. All of our places do it, and nobody does it better. Get them all. Get Costas too. We're going to be there on the 18th, and I got Gina Shaka, who's put the Go-Go's back together. So there's big news out of Dundalk, and I've got some other just great guests coming up after the election. We're getting through election week. We're getting through a short week with the Cincinnati Bengals and a trade week as well. Luke's available at Baltimore Luke. I'm available anywhere the internet is served. We are WNST AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.